Chapter 15: How Systems Collapse Quietly. Collapse is rarely dramatic at the beginning. It does not arrive with alarms, declarations, or visible rupture. It emerges quietly, embedded within routines that still function and structures that still appear intact. By the time collapse is visible, it has already occurred. This chapter examines how systems fail without announcing themselves, and why collapse is often recognized only in hindsight. The myth of sudden failure. Failure is commonly imagined as abrupt, a moment of breakdown, a decisive event, a clear turning point. In reality, collapse is almost always preceded by prolonged erosion. Small deviations accumulate. Minor exceptions normalize. Signals weaken gradually. The event that appears to cause collapse is often the first moment the system can no longer compensate. The failure was not sudden. Its recognition was. Erosion without alarm. Quiet collapse begins with erosion that does not trigger alarms. Performance metrics remain acceptable. Output continues. Roles are filled. Procedures are followed. What erodes is coherence. Relationships weaken. Feedback slows. Trust thins. Responsibility diffuses. These changes are difficult to measure. They do not register as failure. They register as inconvenience. Functioning past integrity. Systems often continue to function after integrity is compromised. They operate through effort rather than alignment. They rely on individual commitment to compensate for structural weakness. They absorb stress through exhaustion rather than capacity. This phase is deceptive. Functioning masks fragility. Success reinforces denial. Effort replaces correction. The system appears resilient. It is brittle. Why collapse feels like betrayal. When collapse becomes visible, it feels personal. Participants describe shock, betrayal, or unfairness. They believed in the system. They invested effort. They complied with expectations. Collapse feels like a violation of trust. This feeling arises because collapse is interpreted as external aggression rather than internal erosion. The system did not betray them. It outlived its coherence. The normalization of deviation. One of the most reliable indicators of quiet collapse is the normalization of deviation. Exceptions become routine. Workarounds become permanent. Temporary measures persist indefinitely. Each deviation appears manageable. Together, they redefine normal operation. The system adapts to dysfunction rather than correcting it. Over time, dysfunction becomes invisible. Quiet collapse and the loss of feedback. Collapse accelerates when feedback disappears. Signals are delayed, filtered, or dismissed. Reporting becomes ceremonial. Metrics are curated. Discomfort is reframed as attitude. Without feedback, recalibration becomes impossible. The system continues on momentum alone. Momentum does not steer. Why effort increases as stability declines. As coherence erodes, effort intensifies. People work harder to maintain output. Control increases to enforce compliance. Communication multiplies to compensate for misunderstanding. This effort is often celebrated. It is a warning. Effort compensates for misalignment temporarily. It also exhausts remaining capacity. The illusion of resilience. Systems often interpret endurance as resilience. They survive pressure and conclude they are robust. They absorb shock and assume alignment exists. Endurance is not resilience. Resilience absorbs stress without degradation. Endurance tolerates degradation until failure. Quiet collapse is endurance mistaken for strength. Collapse without villains. Quiet collapse rarely has villains. There are no singular bad actors. No decisive betrayals. No malicious intent. Collapse emerges from cumulative accommodation, deferred correction, and unexamined drift. This absence of villains makes collapse harder to accept. The system wants a cause it can remove. The cause is configuration. When this is ignored. When quiet collapse is ignored, systems experience abrupt failure. The gap between appearance and reality widens until it can no longer be sustained. Correction arrives forcefully. Observers describe surprise. The system had been collapsing for some time. The point of irreversibility. There is a point beyond which quiet collapse cannot be reversed. This point is reached when internal correction mechanisms are exhausted. Feedback is gone. Responsibility is diffused. Trust has thinned beyond repair. At this stage, intervention accelerates collapse. The system lacks the coherence required to respond. Quiet collapse at different scales. At the individual level, quiet collapse appears as burnout, disengagement, or loss of meaning. At the organizational level, it appears as stagnation, bureaucracy, and declining innovation. At the institutional level, it appears as legitimacy erosion, increased enforcement, and public distrust. The pattern is consistent. Why collapse is often misattributed. Collapse is often attributed to external shocks. Economic downturns, technological disruption, political change, or crisis events are blamed. These events act as triggers, not causes. They expose weakness that already exists. Misattribution prevents learning. The language of collapse. Systems describe collapse using dramatic language. Crisis. Breakdown. Failure. These words focus attention on the moment of visibility rather than the process of erosion. Language compresses time. The system forgets how long collapse has been unfolding. Quiet collapse and the loss of legitimacy. Legitimacy erodes quietly. Rules are followed mechanically. Compliance persists. Trust declines. When collapse becomes visible, legitimacy disappears rapidly. The system appears to fall apart overnight. It had been hollowing out. Why prevention is rare. Preventing quiet collapse requires discomfort. It demands early examination. It requires challenging identity. It necessitates slowing progress to restore coherence. Most systems avoid this. They prefer to manage appearance rather than integrity. Prevention feels costly. Collapse is more costly. Collapse a structural disclosure. Collapse discloses structure. It reveals where capacity was exceeded, where responsibility was avoided, where alignment was lost. This disclosure is often ignored in the rush to rebuild. Rebuilding without understanding reproduces collapse. The aftermath of quiet collapse. After collapse, systems often simplify. Complexity reduces. Structures are dismantled. Roles clarify. This simplification is not intentional. It reflects reduced capacity. The system operates at a smaller scale. Why collapse feels inevitable in retrospect. In hindsight, collapse appears inevitable. Signals were present. Warnings existed. Deviations were visible. The inevitability arises because structure was ignored. Recognizing inevitability does not mean collapse was unavoidable. It means correction was postponed too long. Quiet collapse and renewal. Quiet collapse does not always end systems. Some renew. Renewal requires acknowledging erosion, restoring feedback, and realigning responsibility. Systems that skip this work repeat collapse. Closing constitutional statement. Systems rarely collapse loudly at first. They erode quietly while appearing functional. Collapse becomes visible only when compensation fails and integrity is exhausted. Quiet collapse is not caused by sudden events. It is the outcome of prolonged misalignment left unexamined. End of chapter 15.